This neighborhood needs to remember who keeps it safe, not some little kid playing delivery boy with stolen cash. Officer Martha Jenkins muttered into her radio, her voice thick with exhaustion and a palpable bitterness, a direct insult aimed less at the inanimate device and more at the quiet, expensive neighborhood of Willow Creek. It was Thanksgiving Day, a time for gratitude and family warmth. Yet Jenkins was alone, her recent divorce leaving her with nothing but the patrol car and a growing resentment for anyone who seemed to have more, or, in her prejudiced mind, anyone who seemed to not belong. Her solitude on this most family-centric of American holidays sharpened her gaze, turning her professional alertness into cynical judgment. With 18 years on the Riverwood force, Jenkins trusted her gut. That gut, honed by countless routine calls and a handful of genuine busts, was telling her something was wrong. But today, the gut instinct was nothing more than prejudice wearing a badge. The sight of a small black boy, Aiden Thompson, barely 7 years old, walking alone on this street of million-dollar homes, carrying a thick white envelope, immediately confirmed her bias. He's too young, too far from the lower-income housing, and that cash is definitely hot. Jenkins slammed on the brakes, cutting the boy off on the sidewalk, the abrupt stop rattling the loose items in her patrol car. "Back up," she commanded, lowering her window. "What are you doing in this area, kid? It's family time." Her tone was not one of concern, but of immediate accusation. She fixated on the envelope in his hand. Aiden, a polite child already overwhelmed by the day's events, tried to explain. I, I'm almost home, ma'am. I was just taking a late holiday tip to the church cleaner for my father." Jenkins scoffed, her face twisting into a sneer of disbelief that any resident of this affluent area would use their child for such an errand. "A tip? With that fat envelope? Tell me the truth, kid. Where did you get that money?" She leaned in, her voice dropping into a dangerous, condescending pitch. "Kids don't walk around with that kind of cash unless they've lifted it from someone who earned it. Maybe your people aren't used to this kind of neighborhood." Her statement was a deliberate, calculated strike of class and race resentment, an action so patently absurd that it would ignite immediate outrage in any observer. Jenkins felt untouchable, emboldened by the deserted streets. This very confidence, this blind arrogance, fueled by loneliness and bigotry, was what led her to make the biggest mistake of her career. She was so focused on exposing the boy as a petty thief and his family as frauds that she laughed when Aiden insisted on calling his dad Captain Thompson. However, she could never have imagined that this polite, terrified 7-year-old boy was indeed the son of the powerful black man who had just been newly appointed to command the entire Riverwood Police Department, a man she had never even met. Aiden Thompson was not a deceptive child, but Officer Jenkins' harsh demeanor left him nearly speechless. His breath hitched, and the turmoil in his mind zeroed in on one single thought. "Dad will be upset if I mess up Thanksgiving." Jenkins, observing the boy's rising anxiety, interpreted his fear as evidence of guilt rather than the natural reaction to an adult abusing their authority. She cut off her sneer and adopted a colder, more official tone. "I find your lack of cooperation suspicious," Jenkins stated, her voice carrying a brittle finality. "You're clearly trying to hide something. Tip money isn't usually a thick wad of cash like that, especially if it's coming from an honest source. Riverwood isn't the place for petty scams. If you won't tell me the truth, I'll have to call Child Protective Services. Would you rather spend Thanksgiving in a temporary holding facility, or would you like me to take you to see your parents right now?" The threat of involving CPS was a cruel psychological maneuver designed to force immediate submission from a child. The surge of outrage in the audience would grow, understanding that Jenkins was weaponizing her power and her own personal desperation. Aiden, shivering from the cold and the fear, struggled to elaborate. "I'm not lying. My dad said the cleaner needed cash for their family, and he wanted it to be a real Thanksgiving tip. My dad is a respected person. Please, just call my father. His name is Captain Thompson." He repeated his father's title, not as a threat, but as a plea, grasping for the safety and authority he trusted. Jenkins simply scoffed. "Captain Thompson? Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. Listen, kid, I've been a cop here for 18 years. I know what I see, and I see a child lying to cover a crime. Your father can be anyone he wants, but you won't impress me with fairy tales. Save your breath. She utterly dismissed the possibility of truth, her judgment clouded by prejudice, and what she mistakenly called her experience. This deep contempt for the boy and his story cemented her reckless next move. Jenkins did not wait for another word. Her initial weariness was now replaced by a surge of aggressive confidence. She felt vindicated in her suspicion. She reached to unlock the back door of the cruiser. Fine. Since you won't give me his number, we'll just go find your Captain Thompson together. You can explain your larceny to him in person. This decision, driven by her over-the-top arrogance, was designed to publicly humiliate the family she was convinced were criminals. She physically guided him into the car, locking him in, cementing the abuse of her authority. Aiden, tears finally streaming down his face, frantically tried the door handle, his small hands fumbling with the lock. You can't do this! You have no reason! Please, my pie is on the counter. He broke off, the fear overwhelming him. Jenkins ignored his distress, the mention of the pie only fueling her disdain for this lying, spoiled kid. She turned the key in the ignition, the engine purring to life. As she pulled away from the curb, Jenkins reached for her radio, her voice smug and authoritative. She announced her actions to dispatch, fulfilling the climax requirement of the chapter. I'm detaining a minor for suspected larceny, proceeding to his residence on Willow Creek expecting resistance from the parents. Her confidence was absolute, a gross display of power built entirely on her own prejudice. She failed to notice the dispatcher's rushed, preoccupied confirmation due to the holiday staffing shortage. Jenkins adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the terrified boy in the back, and felt a perverse sense of satisfaction. Justice served, holiday or not. The police car sped off, leaving the street silent. The engine noise soon faded, leaving only the distant muffled sounds of holiday cheer from inside the grand homes. The camera lingers on the elaborate, warm Thanksgiving setting, visible through the windows of the house as they pass, emphasizing the boy's isolation and the stark injustice of his situation. The silence of the holiday street felt oppressive, but one elderly pair of eyes, the conscience of the neighborhood, had seen everything. The police cruiser cut through the deserted streets of Riverwood. Inside, the oppressive silence was punctuated only by the low hum of the engine and the choked sobs of 7-year-old Aiden Thompson in the back seat. Saquon Jenkins was oblivious to the boy's distress. She was riding a wave of self-righteousness, convinced she was the only officer on duty actually dedicated to her job, even on a holiday. She launched into a harsh, one-sided lecture, her voice resonating with years of unaddressed personal frustration. You know, kids like you think you can pull the wool over everyone's eyes, Jenkins scolded, not waiting for a response. I've been on this force for nearly 20 years. I've seen this 1,000 times. You think you're smart, lying about who your father is, carrying cash around to look important. The truth is, lying always catches up to you, and now you have to face the consequences. She used the lecture to justify her own actions, firmly cementing her belief that her prejudice was actually experience and skill. This dramatic irony where the officer is convinced of her righteousness while the audience knows the colossal mistake she is making intensified the narrative tension. Jenkins reached for her radio to perform a cursory background check on the Thompson address. Dispatch, run a quick address check on 401 Willow Creek, just verifying residency status. Due to the holiday short staffing, a logical fix to ensure the twist works, the newly hired dispatcher, distracted by a personal call, simply mumbled a quick, received and confirmed officer, without checking the ownership records, which clearly listed the owner as Captain Leo Thompson. This minor technical error sealed Jenkins' fate, granting her a final, false sense of security. She grinned grimly, her class resentment intensifying as they approached Willow Creek's most impressive homes. Let's see just what kind of trouble your Captain Dad is really in. She felt completely validated, entirely unaware that the elderly pair of eyes belonging to Ba Helen had indeed seen the entire unjust interaction. While Jenkins was speeding toward her self-made judgment, Helen was gripped by a severe internal conflict. Helen, a woman in her 70s and a true Riverwood native, was attempting to enjoy a quiet Thanksgiving dinner with her cat, but the unsettling image of the police car and the terrified boy, Aiden, would not leave her mind. She felt physically ill remembering the officer's cold, accusatory tone. Helen wasn't a confrontational person. She was of a generation that generally respected authority without question. Her instinct told her to stay home and let the situation resolve itself. After all, it was a police matter. However, the boy's genuine distress and the officer's unnecessary aggression pricked her deeply ingrained sense of community justice. Helen had lived in Riverwood long enough to know the difference between protecting the neighborhood and outright intimidation. She remembered seeing the boy Aiden at the local park with his father, Captain Thompson. Just a few weeks prior, a man who had been introduced as the town's new promising leadership. She recalled Thompson giving her grandson a small medal for a community service project, demonstrating his commitment to the local youth. That officer was wrong, Helen thought, her hands trembling. She was cruel. Fear, the cold, powerful fear of confronting a police officer, wrestled with her moral duty. What if she sees me? What if I'm wrong? Helen walked over to her coat rack, the smell of her own roasting turkey almost making her stomach turn. Her sense of community and righteousness finally overcame her personal fear. She grabbed her keys, deciding that her duty to the neighborhood and to that frightened child was greater than her anxiety. She carefully backed her old sedan out of the driveway, making the slow, deliberate drive toward the Thompson house. The sheer act of resistance requiring every ounce of her 70 years of reserved courage. She wasn't sure what she would do, but she knew she had to be there, an unseen witness representing the community's conscience. The police cruiser turned onto Willow Creek's most exclusive stretch, and Jenkins was visibly taken aback. She had assumed the criminal parents of a lying boy would live in a shadier apartment or a less reputable suburban tract. Instead, she was staring at the grandest home in the area, a structure of impeccable design and upkeep, radiating old money stability. Her initial contempt morphed into a burning, class-based resentment. This must be drug money, or maybe an elaborate fraud, she concluded, unable to accept that a black family could legitimately earn and own such a property, further cementing her profound, unwarranted prejudice. She brought the cruiser to a sharp stop at the curb. Without waiting, she opened the car, roughly yanking the terrified Aiden out by the arm, her grip unnecessarily firm. She didn't use the intercom. She wanted a public confrontation, a victory to justify her ruined holiday. She marched the boy up the pristine cobblestone path, her boots loud on the stone. Jenkins raised her fist and began to bang aggressively on the solid oak door, shouting, demanding attention. Her action was completely over the top, ensuring maximum fan no from the audience. "Police, open up! We have your son detained for larceny!" The pounding ceased and the street held its breath. Jenkins was breathing heavily, a mixture of self-satisfaction and adrenaline coursing through her veins. Then a distinct sound came from within, a low, calm, deep male voice speaking through the intercom system. "Yes, who is it? I'm having a very busy Thanksgiving." The voice was controlled, measured, and utterly unfazed by her aggression. Jenkins, convinced she was minutes from achieving her unjust justice, shouted back, fulfilling the chapter's climax. "It's the police. I have your son here, and we need to discuss his criminal activity right now." The audience is left hanging on the sound of a heavy bolt unlocking. It was a slow, deliberate sound, followed by a sudden, intense pause, the calm before the storm. The man behind the door knew exactly who was outside, leaving the viewer anticipating the devastating moment of truth. The moment that massive oak door swung open, the scent of roasting turkey and warm pumpkin pie, the essence of Thanksgiving, hit Jenkins. It was instantly overshadowed by the chilling realization that her life was about to be turned upside down. Officer Jenkins, still rigid with self-serving indignation after her brutal display of authority, stood prepared for a screaming match with the wealthy fraudsters she was convinced were Aiden's parents. But as the stately oak door gave way, all she registered was a sudden, engulfing wave of Thanksgiving spices, a painful reminder of her own barren holiday. Then she saw the man standing in the doorway, It was Captain Leo Thompson. Jenkins froze. She recognized him not as the boy's father, but as the imposing figure she'd seen in the department's internal memos. She hadn't been to the official swearing-in, but she knew his face from the roster. She didn't know he was her newly appointed police captain, but she knew he was important, a man of formidable presence. Before she could process the terrifying recognition, 7-year-old Aiden immediately broke free from her grasp, stumbling into his father's powerful embrace. Aiden's voice cracked, a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. "Dad, she said I stole the money for the church." This direct, heartbreaking accusation from an innocent child on Thanksgiving to his commanding officer father was the peak of outrage the audience had anticipated. Captain Thompson held his son tight, his eyes shifting instantly from paternal warmth to the cold, absolute authority of a commanding officer. He didn't need to check her badge. His gaze penetrated her facade of prejudice. Jenkins' arrogance evaporated, replaced by cold dread as she realized that, in her most arrogant moment, she had targeted the son of the highest-ranking man in the Riverwood Police Department. Her entire self-righteous world had collapsed into a single, devastating mistake. Captain Thompson released his son, his attention now fixed solely on Jenkins. His composure was far more intimidating than any outburst of anger could have been. Jenkins, a woman reduced to shivering, desperately tried to reconstruct her lost self-assurance to offer a defense. "Sir," she stammered, her voice thin, "I was merely... There's been a misunderstanding. I observed suspicious activity, and the child was lying about his father's identity." Thompson cut her off, his voice low, measured, and dripping with procedural finality. "Officer Jenkins," he said, using the very rank she had just desecrated, "you just put my 7-year-old son in the back of your cruiser. You accused him of being a criminal. You failed to verify his identity. Who authorized this?" This questioning of her authority was a direct, surgical strike. He gave her one last chance to speak the truth, but Jenkins sank deeper into the lie, insisting it was a safety protocol issue. Her blatant dishonesty fueled the audience's outrage. She wasn't just guilty of an error, she was refusing accountability. Captain Thompson knew the conversation was over. He stepped back and retrieved his personal phone. His voice carried clearly through the large entryway, loud enough for Jenkins to hear every word but not intended for conversation. "Chief Evans, it's Thompson. I need you to come to my house right now." Thompson continued, his voice utterly devoid of negotiation. "I have an officer here who has committed a gross abuse of power, and I need her to turn in her badge immediately." The cold realization washed over Jenkins that not only was her career finished, but its end was public, immediate, and orchestrated by her new boss on the one holiday she despised most. Captain Thompson ended the call, allowing himself one gentle glance at his son, Aiden, who was still clinging to him, but was visibly calming down. This was the moment of Jaitoa, catharsis. The audience had been waiting for justice delivered instantly, bypassing bureaucratic delays. Thompson turned back to Jenkins. Her face was ashen, her self-assurance completely obliterated by raw fear. She knew her fate. Thompson didn't need to shout commands, but he needed to make a final statement, not just for Jenkins, but for Aiden. He looked straight into her eyes, offering no hint of pity, for she had shown none to his son. It was a cold, absolute closure, fulfilling the final climax of the chapter. "Officer Jenkins, your shift is over, permanently. You just destroyed my son's Thanksgiving." The statement closed the door on Jenkins' professional life and restored dignity to Aiden. The oak door was then closed softly, but for Jenkins, it sounded like the final gavel of a judgment. She stood alone on the cobblestone path, utterly shamed and stripped of her authority. She turned, stumbling away. Down the street, an old blue sedan was slowly pulling up. It was Bay Helen. Helen had arrived just in time. She saw the faint police lights at the Thompson gate and realized that her decision to come forward was now not about preventing a wrongful detention, but about solidifying the justice that had been so swiftly delivered. The quiet ring of the doorbell was the sound of a verdict. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a police chief's sedan on a holiday. Captain Thompson opened the door, and the warm glow of the Thanksgiving living room spilled out onto the front porch, illuminating Chief Evans' grim face. The seasoned chief immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. He needed no further explanation. Officer Jenkins stood there, badge visible but dignity gone, visibly trembling, while Captain Thompson maintained a terrifying, quiet composure. Evans politely apologized for interrupting the holiday, but his voice was thick with profound professional disappointment. Thompson, holding Aiden close, did not raise his voice or resort to anger. He simply and factually recounted the events in precise, official terms. He described Jenkins' unprovoked stop, her racially coded language, maybe your people aren't used to this kind of neighborhood, and the blatant abuse of authority by detaining a 7-year-old child. Jenkins desperately tried to interject. I thought it was a safety issue, Chief. Evans ignored Jenkins and looked directly at Captain Thompson, who swiftly countered the defense with a sharp procedural point. She refused to call dispatch for verification, Chief. That was a choice, not a protocol. Chief Evans, seeing the clear violation and recognizing the necessity of preserving the department's integrity and supporting his new captain, delivered the immediate judgment. He formally demanded Jenkins' badge, weapon, and patrol car keys right there on the Thompson doorstep, placing her on unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. This public, professional stripping of her authority was a powerful moment of Kong Lee, justice for the audience. Officer Jenkins, now just Martha, a woman devoid of her authority, stumbled backward from the porch. She was consumed by a mix of anger, fear, and profound isolation. It was at this crucial moment that Captain Thompson, having handed his initial statement to the chief, noticed Ba Helen standing discreetly next to her old sedan near the curb. Thompson, always attuned to community dynamics, quietly invited her forward, respecting her obvious nervousness. Ba Helen, the unexpected witness, was given the opportunity to cement the act of justice. She approached, her voice shaky but determined, and recounted what she had seen from her dining room window. I saw the whole thing, Chief Evans, Ba Helen said, her voice clear despite her age. She spoke to that boy, Aiden, with pure contempt. She humiliated an innocent child. I usually don't interfere with the police, but I felt it was a disgrace to her uniform and to this community. Helen's testimony was vital. It transformed the incident from a private family dispute into a matter of communal ethics, validating the injustice for the older, community-focused audience. Chief Evans seriously noted her statement, assuring her the investigation would be transparent. Jenkins, hearing every damning word, realized her downfall was not just procedural, but public and morally confirmed. Chief Evans officially took custody of Jenkins' badge and sidearm, finalizing the climax of this chapter. He handed her the formal dismissal notice, stating, "The Riverwood Police Department serves everyone equally, officer. Your conduct today shows you forgot that oath." He then quickly departed, leaving Jenkins standing alone in the cold in a starkly empty uniform. The narrative shifts to Jenkins' internal state. Her bitterness, the root of her actions, flared up. She recalled the miserable divorce that left her isolated and fueled her deep-seated envy of the Thompson family's obvious prosperity and warmth. It was her loneliness and class prejudice that led her to see Aiden not as a child, but as an emblem of the stability and happiness she had lost. There was no immediate regret, only destructive self-pity. She began walking, badgeless, weaponless, and without purpose, into the cold Thanksgiving night. Captain Thompson watched her retreat, letting out a heavy sigh. Justice had been served, but at a significant cost. He turned back to embrace Aiden and spoke softly, loud enough for the departing chief to hear. Justice is done, but I wish she hadn't ruined Thanksgiving for my son. This statement wasn't hate. It was an acknowledgement of the emotional damage, setting the critical stage for the upcoming themes of healing, forgiveness. Justice felt cold, sharp, and necessary, but it didn't feel like healing. For Aiden, the ghost of the cruiser's back seat still lingered in the air. The immediate storm of the confrontation had passed, leaving the Thompson home quiet, but far from peaceful. The smell of the abandoned Thanksgiving feast, the rich, comforting aroma of roast turkey and sage stuffing, now felt bittersweet, a reminder of the joy that had been so cruelly interrupted. Aiden Thompson was safe, sitting nestled between his parents, but his tiny body was still tense. The emotional residue of Officer Jenkins' unwarranted hatred had settled deep within him. He kept looking at the front door, half expecting the aggressive knock to return. He finally looked up at his father, Captain Thompson. The question heartbreaking in its simplicity. "Dad, if you weren't the captain, would she have taken me to jail?" This moment exposed the systemic failure and the heavy cost of racial targeting, far surpassing the injustice of the detention itself. Captain Thompson, a man who had faced prejudice throughout his career, was now grappling with explaining that injustice to his own son. He gently pulled Aiden closer, affirming that his son had done absolutely nothing wrong and that the officer's actions were driven by her own misguided pain, not by any fault of Aiden's. Thompson knew that fixing the administrative failure, Chapter 4, was only half the battle. Restoring his son's innocence and trust was the true challenge. Captain Thompson led Aiden to the dining room, where the elaborate table setting still remained. He used the solemnity of the moment and the symbolism of the holiday to teach a profound lesson, appealing to the traditional values cherished by the older audience. "Son, we fought for the truth, and we won the battle for justice," the captain said, his voice calm and steady. "But the old-fashioned decency, the real strength your grandpa used to talk about, is what we fight for now." He explained that true power wasn't just in punishing people, but in deciding what to do with the strength you gain after the fight. He shared a brief, gentle anecdote about his own father, Aiden's grandfather, facing prejudice but choosing to respond with professionalism and grace, showing Aiden that overcoming hatred requires persistent mercy. The captain wanted Aiden to understand that hate only survives when you give it space in your heart. "We don't let her bitterness spoil our holiday, and we certainly don't let it spoil our future," Thompson asserted. He decided that the current situation offered a unique opportunity for both healing and teaching. He needed to show Aiden, through action, the full spectrum of their family's strength. Later that cold evening, Captain Thompson volunteered to drive out to get some much-needed takeout coffee for his wife, leaving Aiden settled on the sofa. As he drove through the dimly lit streets, he consciously avoided the grandeur of his own neighborhood and instead drove toward the less affluent areas near the local downtown. This led him past the Cozy Diner, a well-known local spot. He spotted a figure sitting alone at the counter, hunched over a cup of coffee, looking utterly broken. It was Martha Jenkins, now in civilian clothes, stripped of the uniform that had defined her for 2 decades. Her loneliness was palpable, a cold, painful sight. Thompson realized that her official punishment was already immense, but her personal isolation on the holiday was perhaps the true sentence. He felt no hatred, only a complex sense of pity. He knew that the only way to truly reclaim their Thanksgiving and to give Aiden the most powerful lesson in his young life was by offering an act of unexpected grace. He returned home and went straight to his son's side. "Aiden," he said, "tomorrow we're going to give Officer Jenkins a piece of our Thanksgiving. We're going to give her a second chance." The ultimate test of character isn't how you wield power, but how you offer mercy. The morning after Thanksgiving was cold and sharply clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil of the previous day. This quiet atmosphere felt like a blank slate across Riverwood, reflecting the profound emptiness Martha Jenkins was surely feeling. Inside the warm, fragrant kitchen of the Thompson home, however, Captain Thompson and Aiden were not brooding. They were preparing. Thompson kept his promise to his son, carefully boxing up a large, untouched slice of their homemade pumpkin pie, along with generous portions of leftover turkey and mashed potatoes. "Aiden," Thompson said, his voice firm yet gentle, "we learned yesterday that sometimes justice comes with a punishment. But to truly fix this holiday, we need something else." He explained that Officer Jenkins' anger and bitterness had left her terribly alone, and the best way to show her the difference between hatred and true strength was to share the very warmth and abundance she had tried to destroy. Thompson wanted his son, the underdog who had stood firm on the truth, to understand that power wasn't about knocking others down, but about the ability to lift them up. This was not merely forgiveness, it was a profound, generational life lesson. aimed directly at the emotional core of the mature audience. Thompson made sure he was dressed in the civilian clothes, approaching this not as a commander, but as a father and a member of the community. Thompson and Aiden drove to the cozy diner. The local spot, while not overly crowded on the late morning after the holiday, provided a familiar, slightly nostalgic backdrop. Just as Thompson anticipated, Martha Jenkins was seated alone at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. She was in plain clothes, looking defeated and far smaller without the shield of her uniform. She looked utterly isolated, confronting the wreckage of her career. Thompson and Aiden walked straight toward her. Jenkins looked up, her tired eyes widening with a fresh wave of fear and suspicion. She braced herself, assuming this was the final humiliating act, a cruel display of victory. Thompson didn't hesitate, but he didn't speak. He simply, gently, placed the box containing the Thanksgiving leftovers onto the counter directly in front of her. He did not look at her with hate, but with a complex mix of pity and resolute disappointment. Jenkins was instantly defensive, her voice cracking. "What do you want, Thompson? Isn't this enough?" Thompson leaned slightly, speaking firmly yet softly, ensuring Aiden heard every word, highlighting the strong contrast between formal justice and personal mercy. Thompson did not touch the box again, maintaining a respectful distance so Jenkins wouldn't feel cornered. "Your career is over, Jenkins. Justice has been served. But this," he nodded toward the food, "isn't about the badge anymore. This is about what you ruined our son's sense of safety and how we choose to move past it. We aren't going to let your bitterness define our family." Thompson looked at his son, then back at the disgraced woman. He delivered the final, life-changing statement. "We forgive you, Officer Jenkins. Now you need to find a way to forgive yourself." He didn't wait for a response. The act of forgiveness was pure and unconditional, requiring no thanks. Thompson took Aiden's hand and immediately turned to leave the diner. The power of the gesture shattered Jenkins' last remaining defenses. She looked down at the box, the generous offering of food, the very symbol of the family warmth she had resented and tried to sabotage. All her anger and self-pity dissolved into overwhelming shame and profound regret. This was the emotional climax of the final chapter, where the antagonist finally finds her capacity for change through an act of undeserved kindness. Aiden, now truly healed, felt a quiet lightness. He looked up at his dad, completely reassured of his safety and the unwavering strength of his father's character. He asked, completing the cliffhanger and providing the final gentle closure for the audience, "Dad, can we still eat that pie?" The story of Captain Thompson and young Aiden reminds us how quickly prejudice can cloud judgment, turning the badge of authority into a tool of injustice. Yet the real power on that quiet Thanksgiving street was not worn on a uniform. It was the unwavering truth held by a father and his innocent son, proving that decency always prevails over bitterness. Justice, though swift, only completed half the work. The deepest healing came the following day, offered in a simple slice of pie that symbolized a second chance. Let this story linger, reminding us that true strength lies not just in fighting for the law, but in extending the quiet, old-fashioned respect that every single person, regardless of their background, deserves.